What is it to be a young student and to lose teachers and friends in a single event that changes your life forever? I was a 16-year-old climber and a seeker of joy. I found myself in the aftershock of one of the worst climbing accidents in the history of this country, one that left me attending 9 funerals, one after another, after another, after another. How do you then go on to redefine a life that must have joy in it, to also include a history that includes tragedy, crippling grief, pain, and long-lasting trauma? Through the years and months that followed that climb, I held to something, that by feeding my own resilience, I could then become both great tragedy and great joy held together in a generous and compassionate life. And I am. It is a lifetime's work. With the rise of school shootings, that pain comes back. Almost 20 years ago, we met Columbine, and then another, and more. When I open the news to the anguish of students, it strikes like a fist, because I know that this is a long path that they are walking down. Through the decades since our own experience on that mountain, most of us who were there have not told this story, because telling it is still hard. There are too many children right now on that path, and if I can say something that'll help these survivors who are on a path that could break an adult, then it's worth doing. I study and teach resilience because humans who have high levels of resilience can show up to do the hard things in life, day after day, year after year. And we need these people healthy. We need them in our lives. We're in a world where a parent may need to know now how to support a child through a school trauma, and the number of these children has been growing. 30 years ago, I didn't think that our institution would be joined by dozens of others that find themselves called upon to walk a line to honor those dead, to support those impacted, and then to keep moving forward. Through those years, I've leaned on the path of those who have gone before me, who value what I value. As a junior in high school, in a boarding school in Portland, Oregon, I became a member of the advanced climbing team, an 8-member team who trained and climbed under the leadership of our mentor, Father Dr. Tom Goman, or Furder. He's a physicist, a priest, a teacher, and an experienced mountaineer, and every year he led a sophomore climb up Mount Hood. The south side route of Mount Hood is a technical glacial day climb that attracts over 10,000 climbers a year. There were physical training days and snow skills training days and beforehand, and everybody was supposed to try out the mountain, but no one had to summit. Each climb was led by Further Time along with another climbing mountaineer leader, other volunteer adults, and several of the members of the advanced climbing team. Many times Furter made the decision to turn around or even to cancel the trip entirely if he wasn't happy with the circumstances. There was no shame in not summiting. Twice before that, I had climbed that mountain and turned around with Furter Tom. We met at the school equipment room late at night and to gear up with equipment like ice axes and crampons and helmets, and for pack checks and gear checks. We got on the bus and we drove up to the mountain, and we were on the mountain in the early hours. The best thing to do is to climb so that you reach the summit with the sunrise, and then be down back to the lodge after lunch. Several students and adults turned around within the first hour, having made their official attempt. We climbed up underneath cloudy skies by headlamp with no stars. I can speak now what a 16-year-old girl couldn't say back then to investigators, which was that I started having a series of immensely painful menstrual cramps. ones which had me doubled over and stopped in my tracks each time that they came back. I tried to keep moving through them, but finally I spoke to Further Tom and asked him if he needed me, that I was in a lot of pain and if he wanted me to stay. He said that one of the other sophomores had asked him about returning to the lodge and that we could accompany each other down. He also said that with the weather uncertain, it was likely that they would go a little further and be not far behind us in descending. It was a pretty straight shot down for the two of us, and we went down and separated from the group as the last ones, and the 13 of them continued upwards. Some students and parents had already left for Portland together, and we too, with a few other students, waited in the lodge and the buses and napped. At dawn, we could see that the weather was not getting better, and they did not arrive. And they continued to not arrive, but a storm arrived, with wind and snow howling around the lodge. Our bus driver contacted the school, and these conversations began. And with the arrival of this full, huge storm from the coast, the efforts and plans for search and rescue had engaged. Rescue teams gathered up on the mountain, and I waited up in the lodge with a growing number of people, rescuers, families, and the media. In the afternoon, I remember going down alone to the school bus, and I curled up on the floor underneath the gas pedals, the tall gas pedals, as if I might make myself small enough to avoid what might happen. I wanted to stay up on the mountain until they came down, but I was brought down off to the home of friends. On the second day, 2 of our climbers hiked out through the blizzard, the second trip leader and one of the other climbing team members. They told of a near summit, followed by a descent, and then the decision to dig a snow cave into the side of the mountain for shelter from the storm. They were able to help the rescuers pinpoint much more closely the location of the snow cave, but the weather was still very bad. The following morning, I woke to someone holding my hand, saying my name, and telling me that they had found 3 bodies. There was no gas pedal tall enough for me to be safe under. So this was the moment when we entered into a nightmare without an escape exit. Over 400 volunteer and professional searchers were ultimately involved in the 4-day search and rescue, including the Army, mountaineers from around the region, volunteer pilots, and multiple emergency response agencies. On the 4th day, under a clear sky, the searchers found the cave and started bringing the last 8 out and airlifting them down off the mountain to all of different hospitals around the city. They were deeply, deeply cold, but because of the tricky nature of hypothermia, no one was declared dead until they had tried everything to warm and resuscitate. One of the doctors told me later that they learned more about treating extreme hypothermia in 1 day than they had learned in 100 years. Of the 8 brought down from the snow cave, that last day, 2 of them were brought back to the living. 7 students had died, including one of my climbing teammates. 2 adults had died, our dean of students and Further Tom. Of those who were survivors of the snow cave, all of them experienced complications from hypothermia, and one of them lost parts of both of his legs. And each of us, our small school and our larger community, took our first steps into a changed world, one in which some of us were dead and some of us were still living, and determining what that was going to look like moving forward. First months and even years afterward, We're an astonishing combination of personal hell and the most astonishing love. Waking every morning after nightmares to an impossible truth, investigations, invasive media, subpoenas, lawsuits, people who took refuge in anger and blame, grief, guilt, harassment, and betrayal. And all of this nested in the most astonishing love, protection and tending and care that extended through our school and through our families, and from our larger community in the city of Portland, and from around the world. We were held, and we hold each other to this day, and I never lose that. And there were gifts, 2 lessons received that I recognized immediately as being deeply important ones that would help me live, and the first of which was resilience. Because right after the accident, that hunger for joy was drowned out by hunger for safety. In a letter, my mountaineer and philosopher father took a decisive and preemptive strike against the invasion of self-blame, writing to me, "Remember that this was an accident in the most tragic and chaotic sense, that you were not chosen to live for a reason, as your friends were not chosen to die. This was a powerful and immediate gift of the lesson of my own non-control of life." And out of it came my first conversation with my own resilience, because everything inside me was screaming that I must never let myself be hurt like this again, that I couldn't take it. And so resilience asked, are you willing to quit climbing? And then, are you going to stop loving? And the answer to each of these was a clear, no, I'm not. So the final question was, what can give you the strength to be with this much pain? And the answer was in feeding my own resilience. Because though I couldn't feel it, I remembered the hunger for experiencing joy. Second lesson was from my advisor, counselor, and teacher. He taught me how to handle the nightmares, and he trained me in mindfulness. And as we all do when we've been given a moment of impossible pain, I asked him if and when I would be normal again and feel normal, live a normal life. And this is what he said. You are experiencing pockets of normal now. These will continue to get bigger, not with time, but with work. And you can also know that for your whole life, triggers and events will bring darkness back up. Other losses, a climbing anniversary, reminders, random things, but also moments of intense goodness. When you fall in love with maybe, when your own children are born, when they reach the age that you are now. When these times come, hold yourself and those around you with compassion. And this felt dark and beautiful and true, and he was right about all of it. Our particular tragedy had an innocence to it. Even a mountain that we love does not engage to maintain a human life. When we die on mountains, we die of that indifference, sometimes mixed in with human fallibility, sometimes not. But I knew even then that I was grateful to not also be facing pathology, enmity, vile creativity. We had just a mountain, and it was plenty. But we were not also facing other levels of being betrayed by a fellow human being. Many of the children who are in trauma pain today do have those extra levels, do face that malice. We owe these more and better, because childhood is reasonably an expectation of protection, to be cherished and nourished until strong. No matter what trauma's origin, I want to give you an analogy for understanding what it is to hold trauma pain in mind and body through years. Shortly after Mounthood, I began to feel trauma as having a tiger that lived in the back room of a house. And that could come out at will, sometimes just to wander around and prowl and remind me of its presence, and sometimes just slash and retreat again. Tigers don't care about relationships, college, jobs, things we want. They just be tigers. Children who are in pain, they've been given a tiger to live with. And these children will not forget. And sometimes that tiger may venture out even 30 years later in an entirely new way. We cannot change a tiger, but we can change who we are that meets it. Having the tiger in my house is why I fight to that resilience, because I know that hurt people hurt people. And where I am not yet healed is where I am not the parent or teacher or human being that I'm here to be. Next week is another anniversary of this climb. My body knows it. Even today, we are all here now by chance. I've almost died again several times since then, and maybe a dozen more that I know nothing of. Our lives are fragile, and we are lucky. And so we are here, fragile and robust. I cannot extinguish a tragedy. But for 33 years now, I have been giving my life, who I am, and what I choose into the hands of resilience and compassion. By adding joy into, I'm going to start that. For 33 years now, I have been given who I am and what I choose into the hands of compassion and resilience, adding light into every direction I can find. And in return, it arrives day after day, gift after gift of being joy. Sometimes still, even in these moments of joy, there's a fear that I must have then forgotten the lives of my friends. And yet, any life that you live from a generous spirit will honor your lives of your friends and your teachers. A long, long road, well, it lies before us, and fate will lead us where it will, and through the valleys and over mountains. I will not forget, but remember you still.